Hi everybody, I'm Beth,
I'm Emre,
and our presentation is going to talk about equity and language testing and assessment.
and I will briefly talk about the background information on language testing of English language learners, and I will specifically talk about three different language assessments that are used by states that have high ELL populations.
And I'm going to talk some general limitations of language testing, especially worldwide, and I'll provide some suggestions for future improvements for equity of language testing.
I'll give you a brief background information on the number of ELLs in the US and how they are assessed in our public education system. So within the past 15 years, the number of ELLs has increased dramatically. So from 2000 to 2015, it increased more than 1 million students, and there are more than 5 million ELL students in US public education system right now. And to be able to better serve these students and assess them and provide them a fair education, there have been several language policy changes in U.S. public education system, and one of the first language policies signed was ESEA 50 years ago to end the poverty and inequality in education and language assessment and all that, and No Child Left Behind, which was signed by Obama, followed that, and the goal was again the same: to create an equal educational opportunity for all the students, no matter what where they're coming from, their SES levels, their language backgrounds. But these policies unfortunately ended up being all like prescriptive and just high stakes, standardized, test based, which couldn't accomplish what it was meant to be. And I will talk about briefly some of the assessments that we explored with this assignment, and WIDA is one of them. And 37 US states, they use this WIDA assessment, and all the ELLs, they are placed into language support programs, and they're exiting from these language support programs are determined by the test results from the WIDA assessments. And unfortunately, in 2017, WIDA increased the test cut scores, and in states like Nevada, where 12 to 14% of ELLs were able to exit language support programs after the increase in the test cut scores, only 2% of ELLs were able to exit their language support programs, which ended up creating unequal and unfair language assessment for English language learners. So another language assessment that I'll talk about with you today is STAR, which is a reading assessment in Texas. And one of the studies that we looked at found that in 2012 and 2019, this was a study conducted 7 years apart, they found that readability level of STAR assessment was way higher than students' current grade level. So if a student is in the 3rd grade, the reading passages that they would get in the STAR assessment was at least 2 or 3 grade levels higher than their current grade level. So we are still assessing these students with this unfair language assessment, where they can't really comprehend what the text is talking about because the readability level is way higher than their current level. And one final language assessment that I'll talk about today is AZELA. It's in Arizona, which has a lot of ELL population. So in Arizona, the studies that we explored for this study found that unfortunately in Arizona, not only students suffered from the unrealistic achievement goals of AZELA for ELLs, but also teachers, they were suffering from this gap between what the policy says and what they can teach, and the unrealistic achievement goals of these tests. And the studies that we looked at found that the teacher burnout rate in Arizona was unfortunately really low. So within 1 year, pretty much all the ELL teachers, they had to quit their jobs because they couldn't comply with the test requirements and the teaching requirements of all the ELLs.
I'm going to talk about 3 general limitations of language testing. The first are language tests that focus on a deficit theory, and these tests attempt to legitimize socially stigmatized varieties of language as inherently inferior. This is a big problem with language testing. Instead, tests should respect the rich resources of diverse communities through eliminating a definition of language proficiency that includes highly particular knowledge. The second limitation of language testing are schools that base their funding on language testing results. This is a really big problem, and the tests are surely going to fall victim to invalidity and inequality. And through these tests, teachers are definitely going to want to leave their jobs because of the pressures from outside sources. And the third general limitation to language testing are not accounting for students' linguistic or cultural backgrounds. And there was an example of a language test done in Saudi Arabia that asked students about rap music, and this is not part of being culturally sensitive to these students from this area. And when it does that, tests definitely suffer from invalidity because they're not able to adequately measure what they intend to measure. Alright, so I have some suggestions for future improvement for equity and language testing. The first one needs to eliminate the gap between test scores and real-life language use. So what we have to do is we have to reproduce content-dependent human behaviors in our text through providing more opportunities for authentic language use, so that our tests can more adequately mimic real-life language use. The second are to humanize language tests by considering test takers as human beings with valuable input. A lot of students reported that when they take language tests, they honestly feel like they're almost imprisoned because everything is taken away, and IDs are checked, and you can't move, you can't go to the bathroom. So by humanizing tests, test takers are able to feel more comfortable and more confident and able to produce what they know. This is going to empower test takers to be active agents in their learning. They also suggest tests that are more collaborative and authentic to develop a sense of shared ownership. When students feel that they have shared ownership over the test results are going to be more valid. The third suggestion is a reconsideration of the linguistic norms of test language and the disconnect in representing world Englishes in diverse communities. So there's a big call for the inclusion of translanguaging and hybrid assessments that allow students to use their entire linguistic repertoires. So that goes with deprivilegizing standard forms in language assessments and developing local theories that move away from highly contextualized language. It's important to align tests more closely with lives, background, expectations, and experiences of test takers. And the fourth suggestion is an inclusion of interlocutors interaction. This kind of hits on everything, making the test more authentic and making the students feel more at ease through their interaction with their interlocutor.
So in the future, we hope to develop a framework in which we can inform policymakers of equity issues in language assessments and to further promote assessment equity for language learners.
And also we hope to present at the EHE Research Forum next year, and that will just encourage all teachers to evaluate their assessments for equity and fairness. Thank you.
Thanks.